How do you prove the existence of God using nothing but pure logic? Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're going to break down a classic argument from the 20th century that tries to do exactly that. It's like a philosophical gauntlet, really, built on some powerful analogies, all designed to lead you to one and only one possible conclusion. And it all kicks off with a single, powerful question. You know, the author isn't just using this as a starting point. For him, this is the self-evident conclusion that he's setting out to prove is the only one that makes any logical sense. So, here's the game plan. We'll start by looking at why the author even wrote this thing. Then, we'll step into the logical maze he sets up. He's going to give us 4 possible explanations for everything. And then he's going to try and systematically prove that the first 3 are impossible, leaving just one left standing. So you might be asking, what gets someone so fired up that they decide to write a detailed, logical proof like this? Well, the author tells us this wasn't just some abstract thought experiment for him. No, this was a direct response to a real crisis of belief he was seeing with his own eyes. The year is 1922. The author is in Ankara, Turkey, and he sees what he describes as this rising tide of atheism that's threatening people's faith. So for him, this is urgent. He feels like he has to forge a kind of logical weapon, a proof so strong it could actually counter this trend and bring people back to belief. And that urgency brings us to the absolute core of his argument. He basically throws down a challenge. He says, look, when you really stop and think about how anything comes into being, reason can only possibly lead you down one of 4 paths. This is the big one, right? The fundamental question he's trying to answer. How does anything, from a tiny fly to you and me, actually come to exist? The author is completely convinced that there are only 4 conceivable answers to this question. And here they are. These are the only 4 options on the table. Either things are just a product of random external causes, or they somehow create themselves, or some abstract force we call nature does it, or a single creator is behind it all. And in the author's mind, there's no 5th option. That's it. So here's the strategy, and it's pretty clever. It's a classic proof by elimination. The author's whole goal is to take us down each of those first 3 paths and show us that they all lead to, in his words, total absurdity. The idea is to leave us with no choice but to accept that the 4th path must be the right one. Okay, let's step on to that first path. This is the idea that a bunch of external causes, or just pure chance, can somehow create all the complex things we see around us. Now, to dismantle this idea, he uses this really vivid analogy. I want you to picture a huge pharmacy just filled with hundreds and hundreds of jars. And our goal is to create a very specific living potion. To do that, we need exact, tiny amounts from dozens of these different jars. So he asks, is it even remotely believable that some random accident, maybe a tremor, could knock over just the right jars, spilling the exact precise amounts needed to create this incredibly complex living potion? He argues that thinking life is a result of random causes is, and this is his phrase, 100 times over more absurd than that. Then he brings it down to a micro level, with the example of a fly. He argues that for material causes to create a fly, all those universal forces, gravity, chemistry, you name it, would have to physically be present and working together inside that tiny little body. The image is supposed to strike you as just, impossible. All right, so according to the author, the first path is a dead end. Now we move on to the second possibility, the idea that a thing can just, form itself. To tackle this one, he uses another powerful analogy. Think about a book. To write a book, all you need is one writer with one pen. Simple enough. But for a book to print itself, it would need separate metal blocks or types for every single letter on the page. And then it would need more blocks to make those blocks, and so on into an infinite, impossible chain. And here's where he makes it personal. The author's point is this: for your own body to have created itself, every single particle would have needed God-like knowledge and power to coordinate perfectly with every other particle. He says this isn't just unlikely, it's a superstition multiplied by the trillions of particles that make you, you. Okay, 2 paths down, 1 to go before we reach his conclusion. The third idea the author tackles is that nature creates things. Now, he's specifically targeting the idea of nature as some kind of impersonal, unconscious creative force. He makes his point with another little story. Imagine a man, a savage as he puts it, who's never seen a building before. He's wandering in the desert and stumbles upon a magnificent, perfectly constructed palace. He can't imagine an outside builder, so he goes inside, finds a notebook full of blueprints, and concludes, aha, this notebook must have built the palace. And for the author, that's exactly what we're doing when we credit nature. He argues that nature is just the set of rules, the blueprint in the notebook. It's not the lawgiver, not the architect. As you can see here, he says, nature is a work of art, not the artist. It's a passive system of laws that has absolutely no power to create anything on its own. So, having argued that creation by random causes, creation by itself, and creation by nature are all logical dead ends, the author finally brings us to what he sees as the only possible destination left. And there it is. By his process of elimination, the fourth way is the only one left standing. The author presents the existence of a single, all-powerful creator not just as a possible theory, but as a logical necessity, the only explanation that doesn't completely fall apart under scrutiny. And to really drive the point home, he contrasts what he calls the ease of unity with the difficulty of multiplicity. He says, think of a soldier. A single soldier acting for a king as part of an army can achieve amazing things with ease. But that same soldier acting alone, he'd have to carry an entire army's worth of gear on his own back. It's impossible. It's the same with a seed. If it's connected to a single creator's plan, it easily becomes a tree. If it's on its own, it would need the whole universe's factory inside of it. But he doesn't just leave it there. He's smart. He anticipates that even if you followed his logic this far, you're probably still going to have some questions. So the text actually wraps up by addressing some of the most common objections. He tackles a few big ones, like why does God need worship? The text says he doesn't. We do. It's a remedy for our spiritual wounds. Or how can creation be so easy for just one being? He points right back to that idea of unity. Attributing all power to one source makes everything simple. And the big one, what about creating something from nothing? He says that's a limitation we put on things, but an all-powerful creator isn't bound by our rules and can create through pure invention. And that brings us to the end. The author uses these amazing analogies, a pharmacy, a printing press, a palace, to build the frame for his logical proof. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. Beyond the actual argument, how much does the power of a really good story, a well-told analogy, influence what our minds are willing to accept as logical, as possible, or even as self-evident truth?